Hey everyone, welcome back to the Much Ado About Nothing podcast. I'm Sam,
And I'm Zach.
and we're here, your hosts for today's episode. Today we're going to be talking about a special topic that's been circulating around the news, around everywhere. It's a hot topic for the left and right. It is Disney. So I think all of us know what Disney is, and if you don't know, you've probably been living under a rock for the past 30 years. So what is Disney? So Disney is this, what? You want to explain a little further, Zach, about what Disney is?
Sure. Yeah, Disney, I'll do a simple, summary of what Disney is. They started out as a small group of people working on animated films, short films, not full length. Then they moved into full length, and then they became a very big business, and it became sort of a family staple to have times you go out to watch Disney movies together, or you would watch Disney movies in your home theater if you used VHS, or when it came to the point of DVDs. Now with Disney Plus, Disney is ultimately an entertainment business that has left behind a very significant and impactful legacy on many people, and has become very nostalgic, and has also had a bit of a rough time lately. So we'll be going into that today.
Yeah. So do you want to bring us to what is our first point?
Yeah, so ultimately, starting off, what we can talk about Disney's legacy. So they, like I said, they started out as a family-friendly source for fun and entertainment. Disney's dream was to bring kind of his imagination to the screen, and to encourage children's imagination, and just really it became kind of a realization of a child's imagination was kind of what Disney movies were, just sort of what you would imagine, but then you're actually seeing it, which was like super magical for a lot of people. And also a lot of them had good family lessons, a lot of life lessons. Some are a little bit more, obscure, like don't eat an apple from a stranger. That's actually pretty important. Don't eat apples that are being offered to you by strangers. But so that's ultimately the first point, the first kind of most significant part of Disney as a company and in their history. But then another thing is, I don't know if you want to talk about it, is their fall, how they've kind of started to find themselves lacking.
Yes. So I think one thing that when we think about Disney, when we used to think about it, we thought about imagination. These kids, it's mostly about imagination, stories we really, really want to hear. But in recent times, they've become woke in their culture and in their ideologies. They keep spurning this idea of transgender, about voting for who trying to divide this world. And that's just hurting the nuclear family, which is just like a mom, a dad, a brother and sister. And it's just hurting the family because it just brings more confusion than clarity, which it used to do. And Disney is overstepping their boundary is something I would say. It's forgetting that what their place is. And what their place is to be an entertainment company. And their place, and just overstepping that boundary. It just reminds me of the school culture now, that teachers are, overstepping their boundaries on what they should teach students. And this entertainment company is overstepping their boundaries.
Yeah, like schools, they're kind of trying to push into a child's personal life and trying to tell them, teach them things that are very personal, that are up to the parents to decide. Which is not appropriate. It should be up to the parents. And then Disney's also trying to do the same thing. They're trying to, using kind of somewhat subliminal kind of hints at things. They're trying to slowly almost hypnotize children. But let's talk about how Disney kind of began. Let's start where they began, with Disney's history.
Before we start with that, I just want to say that one thing I do learn is you got to know your past. You got to know your past to know your future. And it's very important to know and not to forget about the past, but to treasure it, because with those past mistakes, we can see what we could do in the future and hopefully correct ourselves so we don't make those past mistakes again. So in 1927, Disney started his first series of fully animated films. This featured the first character Disney ever made, which is Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. He distributed the rights to people, and later Walt Disney, altered Oswald's look and made a new character, which was named Mortimer Mouse. But, his wife didn't like that, and so Disney reskinned the character and named him Mickey Mouse, who is the star icon that we all know and we all used to love.
I can't imagine the household name of a cartoon star being Mortimer Mouse. Have you seen the newest cartoon about Mortimer Mouse?
It's actually really funny because I think Mortimer Mouse is actually another character that's known as like Mickey's arch rival in like the series. So he did keep it around. But the two silent films that Mickey starred, the first was Playing Crazy. This was in 1928. And Galloping Gaucho.
Galloping Gaucho.
Gaucho. And these were produced by Disney and employed, but he made the third one. And the third one is the most famous of them all, which changed everything. It started with sound. It was Disney's first idea, I think. This is where Disney creativity just comes in. The third movie is about sound. It's Steamboat Willie, 1928. And I think everyone knows what this is. It's such a pivotal moment in America and in just the world to have this cartoon, this black and white picture that was drawn to have sound.
And I think what was also so significant about it was that they synchronized music to it, which was not at all something you saw before that.
You could see just the inspiration where later on in life, that thing that Disney would make would be the normal thing nowadays. And just right out of the gates, just think about it, like a paper picture making sound. And I think at that time it's revolutionary and, immediate sensation.
It also paved the way for their Merry Melodies series, which was a series of cartoons that was basically animated along to music, which became very, very popular later.
Of course, it's just to show how influential Disney was and is, and just because of that, it just made the studio a household name, the first studio to make a cartoon that made sound, and it would be a marketing sensation.
And he had already made that amazing move in the entertainment field, but obviously Walt Disney isn't the kind of guy that just is happy with what he's got so far. Not that it didn't succeed, but next, Walt Disney did something pretty crazy, which really shocked a lot of people. So he was already, like we said, very well known, very recognized and honored for his work. Like, people were impressed by what he did. But he did something that was a pretty big gamble, something very risky. And that was to produce the first full-length animated feature film from an American studio. And Disney had been determined to bring the legend of Snow White to the screen ever since he saw a silent film version of the famed fable in 1917. Hundreds of technicians, literally hundreds of technicians, labored on the expensive production to the extent that it has become known as Disney's Folly. But then when it was released, the film was an immediate hit. It was like the box office sensation, and got so much praise. In 1939, the film was honored with a special Academy Award, recognizing it as a, quote, significant screen innovation which has charmed millions and pioneered a great new entertainment field for the motion picture, end quote. And the animation, all the work that was put into it, the values of the set standards, all those things were what kind of ultimately determined Disney of the future, the company of the future that would be Disney, and how they would, kind of create their films. Snow White was kind of what set the standard ultimately. So now, almost everyone who has ever seen, almost everyone who has seen Disney movies has seen Snow White, and it's still an incredible film, and it still holds up to this day.
So, of course, Disney is just this guy who's really just engineering. He's this guy who is a risk taker, and in modern standards, he's an entrepreneur. He doesn't settle for what is, like, he isn't comfortable. He always likes to be uncomfortable. And, these include and just after Snow White of the 1934 risky move, he just kept making more risks and started to make more movies. This includes Cinderella, Alice in Wonderland, and these stories are just beautiful. They're timeless. They're timeless. You could watch it in any era and you can understand the message and the symbolism. And it's just beautiful. But Disney is categorized in ages, and when we go down to these ages, you're going to see what happened. Why is Disney like this? Why is it woke? Why is it not like the timeless classics used to be? And we're just going to explain which era this is, what it means, what happened. We need to know the context to understand what truly happened to Disney and how it is what it is today. And it starts out with the Golden Ages. This is 1937 to 1942. This is Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This is Pinocchio, 1940. Fantasia, Dumbo, and Bambi, 1942. And this is I think, it's just skyrocketing. Snow White, huge hit. Disney's now a household name. Everyone's waiting for the next movie. Pinocchio comes out, bang, it's the next one. Fantasia, Dumbo, Bambi, all of them are just hits.
And believe it or not, while all of those following movies are considered major hits in a lot of households nowadays, and are still very loved films, the fact is that almost every movie in the Golden Age, aside from the Snow White, none of them beat Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. That was still the biggest hit of them all, by a lot. So that's also very significant.
So what do we got from this? Well, what we got from the Golden Ages is that Snow White is this titan that still is undefeated, but they're still making money, and that's good. They're making stories, and they're making great time. But 1942 to 1949, this is an era that, if you don't know history, this is a wartime era. This is World War II, and it's just the war era. It was proclaimed the name as it was, a time Americans had to join the war, and most of the writers that Disney had were just drafted. The films they produced were in this era, they're not very, known. They're more like anthologies, and it's just, it was able to reduce the cost of producing a film, unfortunately. This era, Disney doesn't have any hits. There's only a handful of movies released. They're mostly helping the war and the government. And so, at this point, you could just see there's a problem here. From Golden Ages to wartime, they're not making movies anymore. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're 5, and then some of them aren't hitting as well as, Snow White or Pinocchio or Dumbo. They're not doing as well, and they haven't been posting or making movies.
And to clarify, they had to make anthologies, because what anthologies are like a series of smaller, shorter stories. So because they did that, it was a bit easier to produce each one because they weren't as expensive. So they were kind of shorter. They weren't as significant. They weren't as recognized. And that's kind of why they were so forgotten, because they weren't necessarily, significant stories from history, or they weren't significant novels like Snow White or Pinocchio. They were just smaller stories that were just kind of to get by in the time.
And so now we hit the Silver Ages, which is 1950 to 1959. And this Silver Age, it's just the second coming. The Silver Age is also known as the Restoring or Post-War Era. Regardless of the name, the era is categorized not by its return to the huge films, these huge movies, but it's also innovation. It's this second innovation level. It's the second wave of innovation that Disney wanted. There's vibrant backgrounds and colors, and he's giving this era is just giving a more magical feel,
Kind of like how we were talking about in the beginning. Like he was trying to put his imagination on the screen. He was trying to make it magical, and this was kind of when that was ultimately realized, when it was like seeing your imagination realized on the screen. It was because of the vivid colors, the bright colors, the fanciful stories and characters. And as for the stories, there are the main films that were released in that time were 101 Dalmatians, which came out in 1961, a big one, which was Cinderella, which came out in 1950. Then there was also The Jungle Book in 1967, The Sword in the Stone, 1963, Lady and the Tramp, 1950, that was a good one, Peter Pan, 1953, that's also well known, Alice in Wonderland, 1951, and Sleeping Beauty in 1959. These are all very significant films that most people most people older than, like say 13, they could probably recognize these when they hear the title. They've probably seen most of these movies. These are still significant movies to this day.
So something you could just note is that you see that Disney's now, again, back to his risky ways. Because we got Cinderella, which is a fairy tale. We all know that. Sleeping Beauty, which is a fairy tale. Alice in Wonderland, which is a book. But you get these, I don't know, The Jungle Book is a book. It's 100%. But then you get these risky ones, like 101 Dalmatians, which is just a new story. Lady and the Tramp, which is new. And I think Peter Pan is a book. But you could just see there's two movies that are getting a little strayed off. They're Disney's now, He's not copying books anymore. He's making his own creations.
Yeah, like he was kind of... he also kind of did that with Snow White. He gave it more of a happy ending. Generally, with his stories, he always kind of made them even happier. He made it what you'd want the story to end with. Because, with like Grimm's fairy tales, kind of where a lot of them originated from, it was, kind of like the name would imply, it was much grimmer. It was darker. There were endings that kind of made you like, why in the world did I read this? But he wanted you to go home like happy, laughing, like you enjoyed the film. Justice was served in the end. Everything went well. We'll touch on this later, but that can sometimes cause problems. But the next era was the Bronze Era, also known as the Dark Ages.
This is 1970 to 1988. Now the Bronze Era is Disney is now you could see they were trying to stray a little during the Silver Ages, but now in the Bronze Ages they're now diversing from fairy tales and books. You see they were trying to dip their toes and they found we found success, so they made new original plots. And while that was exciting for Disney's future, this also, we cannot forget, this is the Dark Era, because directly following this, Walt Disney dies. The original plot seems like a good idea at this time, but they ultimately were like backfired on them. Without their head creator, they kind of didn't do well in the box office.
Yeah, they kind of lacked that Imagineering that Disney provided, because he was kind of the one behind the vision, the one who, kept it going, kind of like the fuel in the engine.
Yeah. And you could just think about it, like these books were very easy to produce, but again, Disney created differently from the books. They're not the same as the books, so there was a little bit of creativity. And yeah, these new movies that they wanted to do didn't do so well.
And now that Walt Disney's own stories, his own ideas for stories at least, had been completely used in the past eras and throughout that time, as well as there were some that came out during this era that were his, aside from those, the fact that he was no longer there and that they had used all of his ideas, then they really didn't have much to go off of. And now they had to, as they say, fly solo into kind of a future they weren't sure of. They didn't really know where they were going to go. This massive company now didn't have what necessarily made it so successful. So films were being, delayed. The staff, the crew, a lot of them were leaving. None of the films really that came out during this were super significant. And so they, like he said, they kind of backfired on them. They didn't really help. And the characters and storylines were becoming grimmer, darker, almost kind of reflecting the current situation at Disney. It was a bit more, grim. Before this ultimately came to be, they came out with the movies like The Aristocats from 1970, Robin Hood from 1973, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh from 1977, and The Rescuers from 1977. So these were kind of, these were the ones that were more significant, more recognized, and pretty well loved. But then when they went into the Dark Ages, there were movies like The Fox and the Hound from 1981, The Black Cauldron from 1985, The Great Mouse Detective from 1986, and finally Oliver and Company from 1988. So these were generally darker films that were a lot, kind of more gruesome. They reflected, like I said, Disney's history. They marked a troubled time in Disney's history.
And just knowing some of these movies, I do know Aristocrats. I did watch it. Robin Hood is just a childhood for me. The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh, and I think The Rescuers is less recognizable for me. But
yeah, that one I don't know. I obviously can't speak for our generation as a whole. That may be more memorable for millennials or slightly older generations, but Robin Hood and The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh were definitely very significant in my childhood.
And like, it just reflects how the last movie, The Rescuers, I'm not very familiar with. It just shows this is it's the start of the dark times. And so we're going to go to Disney Renaissance. This is 1989 to 1999. This is where Disney's luck shifts. This is where they released The Little Mermaid in 1989, ushering the fitting name of the Renaissance era. It is the rebirth of creativity and heights. It is the valley before the mountains. And it's one of the biggest changes in the previous decade that was in the narrative formula. They were telling stories like in Broadway style. The characters were showing emotion through their songs. There was airbrush, there was a lighter background, and the new focus was get celebrities to do the voices. This new era drew massive audiences, and this was considered one of the peak eras in the company. And and before we continue with what movies came in here, you could just see that the Disney Renaissance is what it is now. The same ideas and ideologies are happening now. They are making music through emotion through their song. They forgot about that. They haven't been doing that lately for me. and they're focusing on celebrity voice acting instead of like people who maybe not be celebrities but would be perfect to fit the voice. Their background and their lighting, they forgot about that. Like, they're focusing more on that than they are in the actual movie. It's just, this is very important. These ideas are what Disney did, and they expanded upon it too much. They're thinking more about the background and how it looks instead of the story. They're picking voices that are yes, celebrities, but people who could fit the role perfectly don't get them. And the song with emotions, yes, it does stir emotions, but lack of story. Why is that song there? It's very important in this era to understand what happens. And the movies that come here are The Little Mermaid, The Rescuers Down Under, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, Pocahontas, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. Some of these might be household names to you. Most of them are, but for me, I haven't watched Rescuers Down Under, sorry. Zach, do you have anything to add?
I've seen. I must confess, the only time I've seen Little Mermaid was actually somewhat recently when my younger sister was watching it. But in my defense, it wasn't a terrible movie.
Are you talking about the new one?
No, thankfully not. The new one is okay. Yeah, we'll talk about that in a moment. But that's a bad one. Anyways, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and all those, Hercules, Mulan, Tarzan, those are all great movies. And they were especially, I think, nostalgic. They're especially nostalgic for our generation. A lot of us were raised on these, even though they are somewhat before our time in a way. Usually the generation that comes like, a few years after is the one that it becomes most significant to. And also this is an era where a lot of digital tech was introduced. This was kind of when digital tech was first found its way into the animation economy, business system. Now, in the next era, we will see more of it, but in this era, in the Disney Renaissance, this was when they started using digital processing in their computers to print out colored, or to get colored outlines, to get colored art. And not only did they do physical, I'm sure they did like physical airbrushing in the earlier movies. At a certain point, they started figuring out how to do it all on computers. So they got it with all the lines could be colored rather than, because here's the thing, is that there was a phase where originally they could have colored outlines because, they could use the ink to have colored outlines for the characters. So it wasn't necessarily there had to be a solid black outline. But then there was a time where they would use a certain technology to basically expose, use chemicals to create a black outline on on cellophane, which is what the animation cells were on. I'm not sure if it was specifically cellophane, but on the plastic that they were drawing on, and that's why they called them cells, because each animation cell was a different frame. But rather than having to illustrate line by line each color for the outline, instead what they did is they used a black outline for a while. So it was a faster process, it was easier, but then they couldn't color the outlines. So when they brought it over to computers, which I believe The Little Mermaid may have been the start of that, or at least The Beauty and the Beast, that they actually had a 3D scene in the ball when they're dancing in the mansion. But that bringing it to digital allowed them to add colored outlines, which was very significant. It gave the artists more freedom to add color and express, the color of the characters. So that was also quite significant. And then next, there's the post-Renaissance era, also known as the Forgotten Era or the Experimental Era. This is from 1999 to 2008. Now, I wouldn't necessarily say this is exactly all that forgotten. Yes, there are a lot of films here that were forgotten, but this was when Fantasia 2000 came out in 2000. Go figure. Um, Dinosaur came out. That was also 2000. The Emperor's New Groove, which I actually love, from 2000. Atlantis, The Lost Empire, 2001. Lilo and Stitch, 2002. Treasure Planet from 2002 as well. Brother Bear, also from 2002. Home on the Range from 2004. Meet the Robinsons from 2007. Chicken Little, 2005. And Bolt from 2008. Now, for me personally, I would say that The Emperor's New Groove and Bolt are the two most significant films out of this for me. I didn't necessarily grow up watching The Emperor's New Groove, but I did grow up with the movie Bolt. I saw that as a kid and I loved it. And I then hadn't seen it for a long time until recently. I haven't seen it again, but I've seen like videos about it. It's a movie I loved and I still love. It was just, the animation was great. The general story was also great. This was when Disney started animating films on their own. So Chicken Little was their first film they animated on their own. So that one was a bit rough, and it hasn't aged very well as far as graphics, as far as the visual fidelity. Meet the Robinsons, that one has also aged a little bit, but it's not quite as bad. Bolt, I'd say that was probably visually the best out of them all, but I think Meet the Robinsons had a bit of an advantage because it was more stylized. It had a bit more of an artistic look. It wasn't necessarily supposed to be as realistic, whereas Bolt, while it was still obviously very stylized, it was very much like an interpretation by the artists of the characters. It still was trying to go more for a bit of that realistic visual look, which put them at a bit of a disadvantage because while it was still incredible for the time, it hasn't aged the best visually. So that was the post-Renaissance era, or also known as the experimental era or the forgotten era.
One thing we should note about this era is that most of these people don't know, and then the other half people do know. It's the make it or break it during Disney, and it's very important to know that, because out of having hit after hit after hit, we're starting to see flop or rise, flop or rise, flop or rise. For example, Dinosaur didn't do good. Fantasia didn't do good at first, but later did great. Emperor's New Groove, I think it was a flop, but right now it is great. I glanced at the new Lost Empire. That's a great one. Lilo and Stitch, I think it was a hit. Treasure Planet, it failed. Brother Bear, I think it failed too. And so did Home and the Range, being the Robinsons. I actually watched. It's pretty good. Little Chicken Little, I think did great, but then lost. And then Bolt, I think it did great. It's just a make it or break it era. And then we moved to the revival era, which is 2009 to 2019. Now, this is the return of Disney animation, but this time computers have advanced so much, and CGI animation is the new business model. Pixar has just hit it big. DreamWorks is making its way, and they're just making more stories. And this is where the popular Broadway musical formula with the fancy settings is happening. This era is less about the quest of romantic love, but is more about the protagonist and their inner journey, their self-discovery about themselves, and how confident are they. This is the era where twisted villains come up. A villain that you didn't expect to be bad, but they are. This is the antagonist who appears harmless. Again, harmless, friendly, but later on, people understand this is the villain. And this happened to go strongly with modern audiences. And so far, this was the most profitable period for Disney animation. And, this is Princess and the Frog, 2009, which is the last Disney princess movie that was made on paper and pencil. Tangle 2010, which is animated, is computer animated. Winnie the Pooh 2011, Wreck-It Ralph 2012, Frozen 2013, Big Hero 6 2014, Moana 2016, Zootopia 2016, Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet 2018, and Frozen 2 2019. Something to know about this era is Princess and the Frog is the last drawn movie as a princess movie, and it's just significant how they from the golden era all the way now they switched it up. Disney's innovation. But here, when we hit Zootopia 2006, there's a change. Something different happens, and 2018's Wreck-It Ralph Break the Internet. Now, Ralph Breaks the Internet 2018 is a sequel to Wreck-It Ralph. This is number 2. 2019, Frozen 2 comes out, which is another sequel. And from then on, it's just flop after flop and sequel after sequel. So something's happened, and we'll get to that in a minute. But now we move on to the present era, which is 2020.
Well, actually, first, I want to also comment on the revival era. So with these films also, it's kind of when you start to see more of the slightly left-leaning ideologies being introduced. Like Wreck-It Ralph, that wasn't necessarily in itself that it wasn't very woke or left-leaning. Woke is kind of a broad word, but it was kind of, I think, one of the films that really, well, actually, I think more Tangled would apply to that. The strong female character who, can stand on her own, doesn't necessarily need a guy to help her, and then there's, kind of the weak guy. I'm not going to go as far as to say that, we need to have a patriarchy again, but I think this was kind of when they started taking out what made these kind of, I guess, in a way, more romantic movies, with the love interest and everything, less romantic, because they were kind of making it like, I don't need to be with you, but I'm going to anyways. I think Tangled didn't necessarily fully embrace that at that point. It was still very heartwarming. It was this very sweet movie, and they both kind of worked together more. But as we move through into the later, especially now, you'll really start to see that, the guy is the weak one. So
yeah, you could just feel it. I don't know. It's like it's radiating off that it's girl boss, girl hero, feminist.
Yeah.
Let's do this. We want to please you. We love you. We want you. So
it's kind of like the idea that if you love me, you do all this for me, rather than like sacrificial love or things like, really what makes something beautiful and romantic is when, someone is willing to give themselves up for another. And usually it's the man that takes that position who's willing to give himself up for the other. And I think that's almost more empowering to the women than a man being weak and not being able to do anything for the woman. Because if you ask me, having a man who will stand up for her is kind of something that would be, would give them more opportunity. I mean, okay, yeah. Obviously, there's, the whole argument that, it's a power grab. It's trying to, dominate the spouse, just like all this stuff. But I think really when it comes down to it, ultimately this is attack on the family. It's trying to kind of flip the roles of while these films aren't necessarily, addressing a family in itself, it's kind of what it's doing is sort of attacking the family by kind of swapping the roles of a male and a female, kind of making because here's the thing, is that a huge misconception nowadays is that roles are the same as value, which is not at all true. The truth is that while men and women have different roles in society, and I mean that's only a recent idea that that's not the case, and it hasn't been working really for most people. In the case that a woman does not have a spouse, them being able to support themselves, that's great. But if they have a spouse, them taking on all the responsibility is almost more of a burden on them than something freeing. And, lately we've seen TikToks and stuff of women saying I hate working. Why can't I just get married and, have kids and just, not have to work? But it's we see that the idea of being pushed that women can stand on themselves is not really a very appealing idea for a lot of young women nowadays. So, but next was the streaming era, which is from 2020 to now, if you want to talk about that.
So this is streaming era. This is where different styles, themes, and ideas come through Disney. And after the unexpected news of the post-Renaissance era, they're reviving names. They want to revive names. And the first few movies in this era, well, they're pretty much flops. This is Raya and the Dragon, which, if you didn't watch, is a very good movie. It was the world building. Everything was perfect. The story was not. The character was not. Mm-hmm. Lack of story, lack of character, and that's what made it
so much work put into with so much potential. So much work put into this amazing world that could be used to make such an amazing story, and it was all wasted.
Encanto, it's a Colombian movie. I'm Colombian. My grandma got angry because they weren't putting enough food, because most of the food is more from other cultures, which I make sense. They try to expand for the entire Hispanic, but yeah, and it's movie, and it's just they're trying to revive old movies, and that's where we are. And before we go on, we got to talk about what happened. And so it goes back. We got to go all the way back, the Bronze Ages. This is very important. They're switching from fairy tales to new. They're trying to be creative. But what happens when they get creative? It fails. It's like putting a rat. Have you seen this ideology? You put a rat, there's a red, and there's a green buzzard. If it gets red, it shocks. If it gets green, it gets treats. And it keeps doing it until it presses only the green button, because it knows that every time it gets a treat, the green button will give it food, and the red one's going to taser it. So this is just a warning for Disney. For this, Disney's like, last time we tried to do something creative, we flopped. And so, okay, so then they start, they keep doing it, they're pressing the buzzer, they're seeing what's happening, and then they find fortune. Okay. So they realize, creative isn't that bad. So they keep pressing the creative button, but then for somewhere, creative isn't good anymore. Fantasia, Dinosaur, they're putting so much risk, like the original creator. This, they're trying new stuff, and some of it's sticking, but most of it's not. And so what's that telling Disney is, it's sticking, and for Disney, they're thinking, well, it's not creative. Let's go back to something, more original. And they go back to the princess stories. They're going back to Winnie the Pooh. And now with enough confidence, they try to do creative stuff. It works, but they've lost that confidence in trying to create stuff, and they started making sequels. They try to make other stuff that is new, that's secondhanded, 2 sequels. nothing really creative. They want to stick with the formula, the formula that made them famous, the formula of getting celebrity actors, making it Broadway style. They keep making it again and again and again, and they get comfortable, and they're different from the creator because the creator, Disney, was uncomfortable. He liked being uncomfortable. They've gone comfortable, and that's what's happening now.
Well, yeah, he liked pushing himself and pushing his company. And I would actually, using that analogy you brought up of the rats and the buttons, I would actually say that there are 3 buttons. There's trying to be creative and coming up with your own plots. Then there's and what you think as a company might work, not necessarily based off of what already worked, but something new you want to try. Then there's also a second one, which is making sequels, taking old ideas and just redoing them, or making remakes. So just taking old ideas and working on those. And then there's the third button, which is using, like you said, the original formula that made Disney so successful, making stories about family, about friends, about lessons that are important to you. And rather than trying to, virtue signal all of society with your films, try to make films that actually have lessons that people can relate to, lessons that apply in the real world, lessons that can apply in your own relationships. Not, it's okay to love another guy if you're a guy, or another girl if you're a girl, which my opinion is that it's not. But I believe the thing is, I think people can have different opinions, but when it comes to actually implementing them in society, it really has to be moderated and restricted, and you have to be careful with that kind of thing. So when they try and, while they necessarily have the freedom to choose what they say, because freedom of speech, they can express their opinions, just because they can do that does not mean they're going to be successful. And that doesn't mean people who don't want to watch their movies are misogynists, bigots who hate just people and hate freedom, when we're really the ones, at least my view is that we're the ones promoting freedom. And that's another thing, kind of getting a little off track here, but I'll be done in a sec. The modern idea of freedom is lawlessness, the ability to do anything you want, the ability to make any decision you want, when that is not at all what freedom is. You are most free when you have, like we said last time in our last episode, you are free. Freedom is when you have things to do that you want to do. You have freedom when you have things to do, and you have freedom when there's limitations, because you can get creative within those bounds and you find out what you can do within those limitations. But when you have complete, quote unquote, freedom to do anything, that is not freedom. That's being enslaved. That's not necessarily, what we think of as slavery or being enslaved, but I think that's limiting because there's so much opportunity, because there's so many options. That's not freeing. That's adding pressure, adding anxiety, all kinds of things. So I think the modern idea of freedom has been kind of twisted, and we need to realize that freedom isn't being able to do whatever you want. Freedom is being able to express whatever ideas you want to, and being able to say what you want, but then getting feedback, and that feedback might not always be positive. And also freedom is doing things within laws that keep you safe. But let's actually talk about Disney now.
I just want to add on, yes, freedom, again, discipline is good. 1, number 2, just the thing about the movies is that sequels are going to be a better chance, because you already have an IP, which is an intellectual property. You have an IP that you already know has been successful. Why not make another one? Why not make a sequel?
But then as you build a reputation of ruining those IPs with sequels, which I believe they sort of have built, it only hurts those IPs that when you can create more sequels.
And just if you could just see Hollywood, it's horrible that they're pumping out more sequels. Not only Disney, but Hollywood entirely are pumping out sequels and remixes that don't really need. Their stories are finished. Why do you keep opening the book? One thing that people hate about the remixes is they're telling the same story. what's different from this story than The Little Mermaid? What is this Little Mermaid, the first one, different?
I'll tell you
from this
what's
one?
different.
Yes, there's race, yes, but the story's not different. Expand on the world. Maybe expand on the world. Maybe there's different kingdoms in The Little Mermaid, and maybe she should instead. Maybe it could be about her friends, something different, something unique.
And the only difference in the stories, if there is one, is something that only makes it worse, something that adds plot holes, something that just ruins the nostalgia. For example, they're creating a Snow White remake, a remake of what made Disney so successful. Now, I don't know if they think that they're just going to be able to pump out a remake of it, just regurgitate it, and I don't know if they think that's going to, mean success. I don't think so. I'm not going to watch it. I'm going to be watching the Daily Wire version over on Bent Key, the one with Brett Cooper as Snow White. That one actually looks like it could be interesting. And for example, also Daily Wire's other series called The Pendragon Cycle, which has a bit of a Lord of the Rings vibe to it. It's sort of like a medieval fictional story, sort of a TV series / film. And believe it or not, it's also starring Brett Cooper. But we see Daily Wire, they're coming out with some cool shows now. I bet they're going to probably take Disney's place. But the new woke Snow White remake was originally going to star Rachel Zegler, but she was so crazy with her like super woke comments that investors were getting really mad. So Disney actually fired her, and now they're going to have Jenna Ortega as Snow White.
This is a rumor.
They really want to make it diverse, it seems, because that does not fit the story. That's the thing, is that they're trying to substitute these films that came from, substitute characters in these films that came from specific cultures with someone from another culture. Now, I'm not saying that Jenna Ortega isn't going to be able to do this role. I'm not saying that a Hispanic woman can't play the role. What I'm saying is that it's very obvious, because they've already fired the last actress, who was also, I believe, Hispanic. The fact that now they're continuing with that shows that they don't have necessarily they aren't trying to be accurate to the story. They're not trying to be accurate to the culture, the cultural context of the story. They're just trying to make something that they can release, a film with an IP that was successful.
Yeah, I something you can note is that Jenna Ortega is Latina and Zegler was Latina. So instead of getting a white person, they got a Latino again. And it's just showing how they really just want to push this ideology of getting this. And again, what does this have to bring? We already know the story of Snow White. Why do we need another one? And if so, is it going to be different? Is there going to be expanding on the world, or is it going to just be a different story? And if so, if it's a different story, why do you call it Snow White? Because if it's a different story, get it in a different name.
And my question is, how are they going to deal with 6 grown, normal men? I can't necessarily say healthy, because, they're they seem like actors that probably also follow along the modern woke ideologies, but 6 of them are totally, what we consider normal people, and they only have one real dwarf, one real person with dwarfism in that show, in that movie, when they're supposed to all be dwarves. They're supposed to all be dwarfish. So the fact that they're actually really discriminating against people with, a certain genetic disorder that have an opportunity to be in this film, they're blocking them out and instead putting totally normal, boring actors that probably are not great actors. And also, not only that, they're not allowing a European actress, or at least someone with a European background, to play Snow White, even though that's the origin of the story, is from, the more northern Europe. So it's just a lot of, substitution. They're trying to be what they call quote unquote diverse, when diversity isn't always necessary in a film, unless, say, all the other actresses who auditioned who were quote unquote white. Let's say they were all terrible actresses and the only good actress was Hispanic. Okay, that makes sense. But in the case there are hundreds of other actresses lined up, that's not really an excuse. And then the next film is Inside Out 2. We don't know much about that one yet.
I do actually know.
Oh, okay.
It's going to be about emotions. And again, people are angry because it has plot holes. Because it talks about how Riley's turning older and she's going to get like these 4 new emotions, between anxiety, depression, and I think embarrassment, envy, which just makes plot holes because 1, isn't anxiety and fear the same thing? 2, envy and disgust, aren't they the same thing? Why are they here? Number 1. Number 2, in the original movie, why weren't there in the other person's emotions, in the other people's emotions? Why are they not there? And it's just lots of plot holes. And we're going to see when it comes out to see if they fill in the plot holes. Next is Mufasa, the Lion King, and Mufasa is the father. And I really don't have anything about it. Do you guys have anything?
Yeah, me neither. I don't really have anything. But then there's the Marvels. That one, as far as I know, I've seen that like apparently a lot of actors and actresses have been fired. I don't know if it's been canceled or not.
So I actually got to talk about that one. I went to watch The Marvels. It was an okay movie. I watched it with a friend and my brother. It was an okay movie. The problem with The Marvels is Marvel has announced that Disney and Marvel, they've cut down showrunners to save money. And what showrunners do are these experienced writers who connect the story plots together. So if there's an exciting part and this story part, they're the people who write it together so it fits in. And so they cut these people out. And they're getting backfired. And because the Marvels sucked, it made even lower expectations than what people imagined. Marvel, Kevin Feige, they've been cutting costs. They've been pushing things back. 2024, the only thing dated for that is Deadpool 3. That's all that's dated for that. They're pushing back. They hate the multiverse idea. They're hating it. Fans are logging out. They're not wanting to watch this crap anymore. They're going to try to make a reboot. They're trying to fix, because what they thought that the short term would work, they didn't stick to the original plan. And their original plan was do long term. What is long term? Well, the long term was from Iron Man to Endgame. That was an entire story arc. It was individual stories. And it's beautiful. It's a great story. But now, after that, they started making short movies. Doctor Strange 2, he's not even the star of his own movie. It's a random person. In the Marvels, it makes a little more sense, but there's not enough stories. There's not enough things. There's not enough stuff.
Just completely lacking.
It's just lacking.
And actually, another Marvel film coming up in, I believe, 2024, maybe 2025, is Captain America: Brave New World. Something that's really funny is that it was actually originally called Captain America: New World Order, which is really kind of suspicious because that's kind of the idea that Hitler had for his future government. He wanted to create a new world order. So the fact that Captain America was one who fought against Hitler, now that his film that doesn't star him actually, even though that's kind of odd. But in this episode, we've seen that Disney started out as a great business, a great entertainment company that created a legacy for many children and now adults alike, and that sadly has been slowly declining and falling in its quality and its production. And we've also seen that it's important to keep traditional values, and not even just traditional, just values that are viewed as, good by most people, and keeping those in place and not trying to get rid of them, because then this happens. So that has been this episode for Much Ado About Nothing. I'm Zach.
And I'm Sam, and thank you for tuning in with us. And I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and stick tuned for the next podcast.
Bye-bye.